In 2015, Conchi the flamingo showed up at Florida's Naval Air Station Key West, and he wouldn't leave. Normally managers on the grounds lethally remove feathered troublemakers. It can be very dangerous with birds flying around million-dollar fighter jets, but Conchi was a charmer. Instead, they called the zoo. The zoo slapped a satellite tracker on one leg and a band on the other. They nursed Conchi back to health. But when it came time to release him, the state asked, "Did Conchi even belong here? You see pink flamingos in Florida on t-shirts, hotel signs, lottery tickets, and even the opening credits of Miami Vice. But it's very rare to spot one like Conchi in the wild." Over the past 70 years or so, as more American flamingos seem to be showing up in the Sunshine State, a debate has emerged about the origin of these birds. Most think they're escapees from captive populations, introduced to the state starting in the 1920s and 1930s. But others think they could be a returning population from Mexico, Cuba, or the Caribbean reclaiming a lost part of its natural territory. In South Florida, some joke that only two kinds of animals exist: introduced or invasive species you lose, or endangered ones you protect. And resolving whether flamingos were ever native to Florida is important for wildlife management, because the state says they're not. You would think for as conspicuous a bird as the pink flamingo, we would know some basics, but we just have a lot of questions, said Stephen Whitfield, a conservation biologist at Zoo Miami studying flamingos. So he assembled a team of specialists to sleuth through explorers' notes, museum specimens, and birding reports dating back more than a century to uncover the historical origins of American flamingos in Florida. Now their paper, published Wednesday in the Condor, Ornithological Applications, could help make the case for treating flamingos as Florida natives, possibly even endangered ones, which would entitle them to certain protections by the state given to other imperiled birds. The study concludes that flamingos once lived in Florida in flocks of up to 2,500 birds and may have even nested there. But by the early 20th century, the population vanished, hunted to extinction for meat and feathered hats. Most scientists, including Jerry Lawrence, a biologist at Audubon, Florida, who worked on this study, had assumed that flamingos in Florida were, in most cases, fugitives from the Hialeah racetrack north of Miami, where captive-bred birds have been living for decades. But in 2014, nearly 150 birds showed up at a constructed wetland in the Everglades ecosystem in central Florida. This followed earlier sightings of birds from Mexico in Everglades National Park. Scientists used these sightings as evidence that not all American flamingos in Florida were escapees from tended flocks and convinced the state to let them release Conchi into Everglades National Park. They hoped he would fly home, revealing his mysterious origin. But Conchi just hung around. 2 years later, his tracker died, and his secrets remained. But another message emerged: wild flamingos may be returning to Florida, even just for temporary living, and they seem to be comfortable in the state's protected and restored habitats, despite numerous ecological changes in the past century. Where they come from, said Mark Cook, a scientist at Everglades Systems Assessment at South Florida Water Management District who was not involved in this study, doesn't really matter. If these habitats are made more suitable for flamingos, the birds are likely to find them, he said. Will we classify them as an invasive species if they make it here on their own steam and set up their shop here? He doesn't think so. From time to time, birders still report seeing Conchi with other pink flamingos in the Florida Keys and Bay. Dr. Whitfield and his team are now working on using DNA and diet analysis to get to the bottom of their origins. Until then, they should be treated as any native part of our fauna, Dr. Lawrence said.